Okay, well, welcome back, Counterpoint class. Of course, we're starting with the study of counterpoint, and eventually we'll be moving to see how that connects to some basic concepts of harmony. And you all have successfully completed your first assignment from chapter 9. If you haven't, for some reason, you still owe me some work. You can still get it in, but please do that quickly. Okay, so I think most of you had a good grasp on what's going on here in these three examples, these three exercises. You successfully labeled your intervals, so that's the first thing you want to do. We have a third here, a sixth here, third. Okay, so primarily we have what are called imperfect consonances. Oh, this is interesting. We have a string of so two back-to-back thirds, what we'd call parallel thirds. Here we have a fifth. Okay, so this looks like a big interval, right? Now, some of you called this a tenth, some of you called this a third. In general, what we do in this class is simplify. We're going to reduce compound intervals to the smallest number. So it's not to say it's wrong that it's a tenth. Some textbooks will say that. In general, I think it's simpler just to reduce or simplify that to within an octave. Okay. Certainly, if you go bigger than a tenth, if you're saying, "Oh, that's a 13th," then it's getting to a point where we just don't see those numbers. Okay, and this is a sixth. Okay, and again, these are. Oh, I'm sorry. Why did I say that was a sixth? Octave, sixth. Here we have third, and we go to unison. You can say PU or just U, either one. It's fine. Now, what's the next thing I should do? Well, you should get into the habit of circling your perfect consonances. So we're going to start with, okay, we're going to circle. Let me make sure this is here. Okay, so we circle our unison. Let's circle our perfect fifth. Let's circle our octave. And let's circle, again, our unison here. Okay, and why are we circling? Well, this is to catch errors because we tend to remember that there are quite a there are a few problems that come up with perfect consonances. So this is alerting us to the fact that, okay, here we have one. Let's double check that there's no problem here. So you're getting into the habit of it's a tool that you can use to check your own work. Okay, so go ahead and make sure you're doing that. The next thing they asked you to do, label the skips or leaps. Okay, so we have, for the most part, we have a step. There we have a skip, step, step, step. Mostly stepwise motion, isn't it? Okay, let's see if we can sing this one. Do, re, fa, mi, fa, sol, la, so, mi, re, do. Can you try that with me? Do, re, fa, mi, fa, sol, la, so, mi, re, do. You'll notice, no, I'm barely warmed up. It's still the morning here, but this is very easy for me to sing. And the main reason for that is, the range is not very big. It's only from C to A, that's a sixth. And it's mostly stepwise motion. And you'll find that those two things are the case with species exercises. In general, the range is not terribly big, usually within an octave, maybe a bit bigger, but it's not going to be very rangy. You're not going to go into the extreme high or the extreme low. And in general, you want the sense of smooth flowing motion. So you want a easily singable melody. So this is a good way to check your work. If you've written a counterpoint, and actually the counterpoint is down here, so we'll check that too. If you've written a counterpoint that's mostly skips and leaps, well, you might want to reconsider. Okay, let's check the bottom. Okay, here we have a step, step. Here we have a skip, step, step. Leap of a fifth. step. Here we had the same note. Here we had a skip, and here we have a step. Okay, so even though we do have a good amount, well, what do we have? We have 1, 2, 3 steps. I'm sorry, skips or leaps. You would consider that possibly a lot for an exercise. Really, you don't want too many. Now, some of you said that was disjunct motion because you had 3 examples. Well, look at the prevailing or the overall amount of stepwise motion. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We had six instances of stepwise motion. We have 3 instances of skips or leaps. Okay, so in general, you're going to have for most of the time conjunct motion. This probably was a little bit confusing because you're saying, well, I don't understand because there are leaps. We're saying overall, it's mostly stepwise. Let's see if we can sing it. Sing along with me. Do, ti, la, do, re, do, fa, so, ti, do. Now, I do agree that this has a big leap in it. And in this style, when you have a leap of a fifth, it really feels dramatic. Unlike, let's say, you probably know this song. Right? Do, do, so, la, la, so. There's a melody from most of our childhoods. It's also an old French song from a couple centuries ago. You might also know it as a theme and variations by Mozart. But in this style, when you have a fifth, it really feels dramatic because this is a vocal art form. And the goal of each one of these, both the Cantus Firmus and the Counterpoint, is to create a smooth, flowing, beautiful line. Notice that this has an upwards arc. This has a downwards arc. This is something that's very common. It's also possible for the lower part to have an arc that looks like this. So it's not necessarily that it's always a downwards arc, but we do want some sort of arc, and this is part of the art of making a beautiful line in this style. Okay, so both parts, the upper part and the lower part, are considered conjunct. Okay, job well done. Try it number 2. Okay, first thing we should do, label the intervals. So again, we had some instances of, here we have, and some people call these tenths. That's fine. I would not mark that wrong on a test or a quiz. I'm reducing this to within an octave just because it's simpler, it's easier to see, and because the intervals are going to get bigger anyway. Here, both are going in opposite motion, contrary motion. So I would not call that a 13th. I'd call that a 6th. All right. I would not call that a 10th. I'd call that a 3rd. Again, I wouldn't mark a 10th wrong. I wouldn't take off points. But I think you should get into the habit of reducing these. And notice that primarily these are made up of imperfect consonances. We only have one instance here of, at least so far. Let's see. Yeah, we have 1 octave. We have a 3rd. Okay. So mostly 3rds and 6ths. And we finish up, of course, with an octave. I would not call that a 15th. Some people call that a 15th. We don't see that when we analyze. You're going to reduce that to an octave. Okay, the next thing you should do, get in the habit of circling your perfect intervals. So we have an 8, an octave. We have an 8 here. And we have an octave here. Okay. Looks good. And in this exercise, you're looking at the motion from measure to measure. So 1 to 2. Okay, right, that's contrary motion. 2 to 3. Oh, these are going in the same direction by the same amount. That, of course, is parallel. Those are parallel thirds. This is the same thing. Okay, that's parallel. This is contrary motion going opposite. This is interesting. One voice stays the same, the other moves. Okay, that's going to be oblique. Now, you don't see a lot of oblique motion in this style. We will see it from time to time. Again, I described, well, when do you use contrary motion? When do you use parallel motion? When do you use similar motion? Well, we have to be careful with parallel motion and similar motion because of how they approach perfect intervals. Oblique motion, we really only use as a way of getting out of problems. If you really can't figure out another solution, then okay, you could have the same note. Okay, here we have, this is the same direction, but by different amounts. So that's going to be similar motion. Okay, again, this is contrary, contrary. Okay, I think most people had this. Contrary, contrary, contrary. We like contrary motion because it doesn't present problems. As long as you're going to a consonance, it works well. And when we hear these together, actually, let me do this an octave apart. Okay. And you'll notice that the whole idea with species 1, it's just so beautiful. There's no dissonance, and we're going to see why we're not using dissonance, because we're going to insert some in species 2. That's coming up next week. Here we're going to try to focus on, okay, well, our next step will be to compose a counterpoint of our own. So we're working up to that. But you'll notice in this style, in species 1, there is no dissonance, and that really has a big effect on the overall feeling of the piece. Okay, but there's a good reason for that. So we're holding off on that dissonance. We don't want seconds, we don't want fourths, we don't want sevenths. Okay, and lastly, again, the first thing you should do, write harmonic intervals between staves, circle any perfect, so parallel perfect intervals. So we're looking for problems here. Okay, so let's first identify our intervals. Now, some people had trouble with the intervals themselves. If you find that, sometimes I make mistakes with intervals, make sure you are counting 1 when you're measuring the distance between a note. Let's say I was measuring the distance between these 2 notes. So first of all, find this A on the keyboard. This is the A below middle C. All right, and this is the F above middle C. It's important to find exactly where those are in space. When I say in space, I mean, well, which is the lower note, which is the higher note, because you could accidentally do this where you put the A up here and the F down here, and then you'd come up with a different answer. So it is important to say which A and which F. And to do that, I would recommend doing this at the keyboard. Okay, the next thing you're going to do, make sure you're counting 1. Let's say we're counting from left to right. So we're going to count 1 for A. Then we're just going to walk right up the scale. 2 is B, 3 is C, 4 is D, 5 is E, 6 is F. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. By the way, you can count the other direction too. Some people think, well, how do you count from high to low? Well, it's the same thing. Make sure you're counting 1 for F, 2 for E, 3 for D, 4 for C, 5 for B, 6 for A. You get the same number. One way to think of this is picture measuring your height. How tall are you? Are you the same distance from your feet to the top of your head as you are from the top of your head to the tip of your feet? hopefully you're coming up with the same answer no matter where you start. If you're not, then maybe there's something wrong with your ruler. Okay, so I think you understand the metaphor there I'm using. Okay, so first thing we should do, identify our, oh, we see problems already, don't we? We're identifying our intervals first. Okay, so there we came up with a sixth. Okay, looks like parallel sixth. We like parallel sixths. They move very well. They don't upset anything or anybody. Uh-oh. Octave, octave, octave. Here, this is a fifth. Ooh, this is filled with problems, isn't it? Okay, and wow. So if you look at the difference between, let's say, try it number one. How many perfect intervals do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4 out of 11 measures. Try it number two. We had 1, 2, 3 out of 12 measures. Here we have, okay, let's circle them. One, oops, back up a little bit here. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Uh-oh, this looks like a problem. 7, 8, and 9. Wait, wow, this is mostly perfect. These are mostly perfect consonances here. This is a problem. 9 out of 11. It's just not typical. You want to avoid problems by mainly using imperfect consonances. Okay, and why do we circle these? Well, because they are problematic. We need to make sure we're not getting into any trouble. And that's exactly what we did. This person, in fact, this is Schenker, who is a famous a music theorist who developed his own system for music analysis. This he wrote this Cantus Firmus, but I believe that the textbook wrote their own problematic counterpoint. Okay, so of course this represents parallel unisons, parallel octaves, parallel octaves. Okay, now is this a problem? Octave to fifth? Well, as long as one voice is moving by step here, we're not leaping, we're fine. This is just contrary motion, so that's okay. If you had both voices leaping from an octave to a fifth, for example, let's say we had something like this. I have to change the key. Or you can hear that leaping, even in contrary motion. When we leap to a perfect interval, it still has the sense of accenting or bringing out these voices. But remember, the whole goal is to create smooth, flowing, beautiful lines. Fifth to a fifth, problem, parallel fifths. Okay. What about fifth to an octave? Is that okay? Well, here we have this is similar motion. Again, we want to avoid. I would put in a little S here. Now, your textbook didn't. Your assignment didn't ask for you to identify similar motion, but this is an example of this is a similar motion octave. So we're arriving to an octave by way of similar motion. This has almost the same effect as parallel motion. Again, we are in a sense accenting this note. And really what we want is a sense of, well, we're starting from perfect consonants, we're ending on perfect consonants. When I play this for you, you'll really feel like, wow, there's a lot going on here. Not only that, look at this counterpoint has leapt up. Now I've seen many pieces of homework that do something like this, where you leap up. But in general, if you have, again, the rule re, do, or second scale degree moving to first scale degree, well, you know the solution. You want T, do. So that would be easy to fix. T, do. You want 7, 1. Scale degree 7, moving to scale degree 1. Okay, so this one just doesn't work. Look at all those problems. So this is a good example of things to avoid in your upcoming homework. All right, but job well done. Most of you, I think, did fine, and everyone got a bit of feedback. So if you have any questions, you can always email me about that or ask in class. Okay, so today I'd like to finish up chapter 9 and make sure you have enough information to go successfully write your own counterpoint to a given cantus firmus. All right, so let's get back into the chapter and we'll finish up some aspects of it. Okay, remember here we were talking about parallel unisons. They gave us parallel octaves, parallel fifths. They gave us lots of examples of what not to do. And remember the reasoning behind, well, why can't we use similar motion octaves, which are also called hidden or direct octaves? Well, the thinking is that, well, essentially, for example, here, you might try this on the keyboard. You can really hear that this moment feels accented. Let me change the color here. This motion to that octave feels very accented. And why is that? Well, the theory is that it's almost as if you're passing through the notes that we skipped over. And in doing so, you're going to pass through this octave. So it's as if our ear fills in the gaps. Okay, I buy it, sure. Another way of thinking of it as, well, our perfect consonances have a sense of pausing or accenting. So it's almost as if you put an exclamation point in the wrong place, right? You want to be careful about where you put your exclamation points. Right? Do you want to use them all the time? Well, in everyday language, we use them a lot. Exclamation point. But in formal writing, let's say, you might not use them all that much. Or let's say you related it to a period versus a comma or a semicolon. You want to save that period for the end of your sentence. So it's as if we're using it too soon. Okay, and the same goes for hidden fifths or direct fifths. So again, this is moving in similar motion. Again, I would try this at the keyboard. Make sure you see how it's similar motion. And the theory is that we're filling in the gaps. Our ears hear that fifth, and it's as if we create parallel fifths. Okay, and again, has that sense of accenting. Okay, something to avoid. All right, so there are a couple new things that we didn't quite get to that I want to make sure you learn about before you write your own. We have been talking a lot about perfect consonances, the unison, fifth, and octave, and why those can be potentially problematic, mainly parallel motion or similar motion. Okay, what about all the other intervals? Well, those would be the imperfect consonances. You know this already from your study of first semester theory, thirds and sixths. It doesn't matter in this case if they're minor or major. We're going to treat them essentially the same. Now, the question for you, are we allowed to have parallel thirds and parallel sixths? Well, yes, actually. They are kind of like our bread and butter. They are what makes it oils the machine. You put oil in the car, it helps things go. Here we go. Here we had some parallel thirds. Here we have another case of parallel thirds. If you looked in your examples from your chapter, we also had some parallel. Here we have parallel thirds. We had examples of parallel sixths. I believe maybe that was the first one here. Okay, third, sixth, third. Okay. Well, anyway, you get the point. Is that basically thirds and sixths are treated as interchangeably, and there's a good reason why. If you think about, let's say you just for exercise sake, let's say if we switch these two notes. Let's say if I put a C here, I'll put a C here and an E up here. Now this wouldn't work for our line here, but just for a little experiment. Okay, let me work on my. Okay, let's say we put an E up here. Now, this is a little bit high. It won't really work for our line all that well. But I'm just switching the notes to see, okay, well, how are C and E related to one another? So what I've just done is I put this E down here, and I put this E, this C down up there. Okay, I just switched voices. What I just have done is called inverting the interval. I changed the octave of the interval. I took this C and moved it up. You see how that worked? This is very easy to do. In fact, we do this accidentally sometimes. Some folks have trouble identifying intervals because they often invert their intervals accidentally. But why am I doing this? It's to show you that when you do invert it, what do you come up with? Well, this is an E against a C. Try to find this E. It's the E above middle C. And the C is an octave higher, so that's C5. Let's count our intervals. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So thirds invert to 6. So there's a good reason why thirds and sixths are treated interchangeably. They essentially act as the same thing. Okay, so this is good for us to know that we're free to use thirds, we're free to use sixths. Notice that we have the same. This is in contrary motion, totally fine. Right. Here we have getting out of an imperfect consonants into a perfect consonance. Is that okay? Well, yeah, this is contrary motion. Contrary motion, again, we love contrary motion because it really doesn't cause problems as long as we're not leaping in both directions. Again, if you just keep in mind, okay, this is a sung art form. We want a smooth, flowing, beautiful line from beginning to end, from left to right. Well, then you'll probably catch a problem like that. If both voices were leaping upwards, or I'm sorry, leaping outwards. Okay, and let's hear this exercise. Let's see if it works. Yeah, it sounds smooth and flowing. Again, we have the Schenker, Cantus Firmus. Oh, look at this. At the cadence, we had Re, Do. That's scale degree 2, 1. In our Cantus Firmus. And what do we have in the counterpoint? We have 7, 1. Ti, Do. Okay, so that's our cadence that we basically need to memorize. This exists in all of the species 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We're only going to look at species 1 through 4 in this class, just to be introduced to it, so you can study it further if you choose to go on in your studies. Okay, so imperfect consonances, got it. Now there's one tool in your tool belt that you should know that's very useful, and this comes up all the time in lots of different kinds of music. Actually, it's not just contrapuntal music, and it's not just species exercises, and that's the idea of voice exchange. It's basically what we just did, but it adds one element to it. Remember when I asked you to invert your third and it turned into a sixth? Well, this is something you can do. Let's say let's say if you're writing your counterpoint, so here's the counterpoint. You were given this cantus firmus. Okay, so it's that same cantus firmus we were dealing with, and let's say you hadn't written your counterpoint yet, and you're trying to come up with a nice, smooth, flowing, beautiful line. You want to start on your unison. You don't have to start in unison, by the way. Do you remember the different ways to begin? Well, you do have to start with a perfect consonant. So it's either unison, perfect fifth, or perfect octave. But there's an interesting but here. When you have the counterpoint below, this is an important point, so listen carefully to this one. When the counterpoint is below the cantus firmus, you can't use a perfect fifth. And why is that? I believe I said in the last class that, well, if you start with a perfect fifth, it confuses the ear. We're not sure which key you're in, because we often associate the lowest note, in this case C, with our home base, our do, our tonic, our key, C major. But if you had a fifth below this middle C here, let's say we put that on the staff. So instead of a C, let's start with an F. Well, this confuses the ear because we're saying, wait, is this in the key of F major or C major? The cantus firmus tells us we're in C major, so we can't have an F in the bass. This is why when you have the counterpoint below the cantus firmus, you cannot start with a perfect fifth. You can either start with a unison or an octave. So this won't work. Okay, but we equally could have started with an octave. Okay, so if you start with a perfect unison here, most likely you'll be working your way back to the perfect unison, because remember, you want to create an arc, smooth, flowing, beautiful line. Okay, and let's say you start working your way through. You're writing a nice counterpoint, and you get to this moment where the cantus firmus is ascending, fa sol la, and you get to this moment where you have a sixth. This is a great opportunity that you should not pass up. What opportunity is that, you ask? Well, notice if you're starting on a sixth here and your cantus firmus is ascending, you have the opportunity of voice exchange. What is that? That's where the other voice, our counterpoint, is going to move in the opposite direction and essentially exchange voices. Notice that this F is going to be put over here, that F. This A is going to be put over here. So it's as if they've exchanged voices. And again, remember when we were inverting the interval? Well, that's exactly what we did here. This is a sixth turning to a tenth, otherwise called a third. Again, I like to reduce the intervals to within an octave so we can just see them more easily. But that's not all, right? We didn't just invert the interval, we passed through a note. And this is the formula basically for voice exchange. Now you can go in either direction. Let's say you had the opposite where you started on A, G, F. We could have gone from a third to a sixth. So you can go it can go the other direction as well. Okay, so for example, let me write that out for you so it's not too confusing. So let's say you had, let me go over here. Let's say you had in a separate exercise, okay, descending line, and let's say we were on a third. Okay, so creating a separate exercise over here. Let's say we had a third, otherwise known as a tenth. Well, and we're trying to come up with, okay, what could we do with our counterpoint that's interesting and that will make the smooth flowing beautiful line. Well, if this is a third and this is moving downwards by step, we have an opportunity. We can move upwards and do our voice exchange. A goes to A, F goes to F. Okay, so this is a great tool. This would be 3, 8, and 6. Okay. So remember this tool, because this could really come in handy. If, let's say, if I gave you let's say I gave you a quiz or a test, and I said, okay, try to use one instance of voice exchange. Would you know how to do it? So you'd be looking for a moment like this. That's either starting with a sixth or a third and moving in opposite directions. Okay, so keep that in your arsenal, in your tool belt, to be used soon. Okay. All right, so key concepts for species. All right, this is how to approach composing your own. All right, so let's say you're given a cantus firmus and I say, write a counterpoint. First thing you should do, you want to make sure you're opening correctly and cadencing correctly, your closing gesture. All right, how do you start in general? Well, you need perfect intervals, perfect consonances, and if your counterpoint is below the cantus firmus, as we just said, you cannot start with a perfect fifth. All right, the vice versa is not true. So if you have the counterpoint above, you could start with the unison fifth octave. Closing gestures, re do is met with ti do. So 2-1 is met with 7-1. Okay. Watch for any parallel fifths or octaves. Again, I encourage you to circle your intervals. If you have instances of perfect intervals, this is a way of alerting you to the fact that, oh, you might have a problem. Okay. This says, write only consonant harmonic intervals. Okay, so we have not looked at dissonance yet. We're not using dissonance in species 1. So we're going to avoid seconds, fourths, and sevenths. Okay, and this says avoid dissonant melodic intervals. So, okay, this is a big one too. But we didn't really look at in terms of melodically. We haven't seen problems to that, but if you look, let's say at this cantus firmus, let's look at the cantus firmus here. This moves by a second, this moves by a third, second. Again, it's mostly smaller intervals. You don't have any leaps. When you do leap, you're going to leap by a perfect fourth, a fifth, a sixth. You do not want to leap by a tritone, for obvious reasons. It's dissonant. Now, they did not give you an example of that because we just don't see it in this style. Notice that we have a big melodic leap here. And let's check that interval. C to F, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ah, that's a perfect fifth. Now let's say we were in the key of G major and that was an F sharp. Ooh, that's not good. This is a tritone. So this is where it's really important to know your intervals. As I said at in our first video, which was a review, I said, if you don't know your intervals, it's really going to be problematic. So make sure you know how to identify the tritone. The tritone can either be the diminished fifth or the augmented fourth. Either one we don't want for obvious reasons. Right, sounds like an ambulance going by. We want to avoid it because it's dissonant. Okay, just as in we would avoid a large leap of, let's say, a seventh. Sorry, or even worse. Right, we don't want major sevenths, minor sevenths. So it is okay to leap, but you have to be careful how you do it. Okay. So many rules, so many things to keep in your brain while you're writing and exercising. But if you just start with the idea of, well, you're making a smooth, flowing, beautiful line. If you sing it, I think you'll catch some of these things. For example, if you had a nice line that was going do re mi fa ti, you'll say, oh, that was hard to sing. Why was it hard to sing? It really, that last note really leapt out. Well, it's because there was a it was because of there was a big leap and of a tritone. That's going to be a problem. Okay. All right, and we have arrived at the moment where we should think about looking at our exercise here. Okay, so try it number 4, and I put this in a different document, so you have actually 2 examples. But let's go through this and see if we can identify just some basics, right? So let's say if we were given this cantus firmus, notice that the cantus firmus is in the lower voice. It's always a good idea to sing it. Let's try singing that. Do sol fa mi re do. Okay, the first thing we want to do is establish the beginning and the ending, right? What's our opening? What's our closing gesture? Well, the closing gesture is very clear that, well, if this is re do, scale degree 2, going to scale degree 1, and they already put it there for you, we're going to need ti do, scale degree 7, moving to scale degree 1. Now you notice we're in a minor mode. This is D minor, isn't it? In a minor mode, you have to raise your leading tone. If you want ti do, you have to raise that leading tone at the cadence. We're only talking about the cadence. We're not talking about, let's say if you had a C somewhere else, like here, that's a 5th. Okay, we're not going to put a C sharp here. We're mainly going to use that C sharp at a cadence, that raised 7th scale degree. Okay, so that covers the cadence. What about the beginning interval, the starting interval? Well, if we're going to end up here, I think it's a good idea to start on the same note. Oh, did you have other options? Well, actually, yes. Could you have started? Could we start down here? Technically possible. Yes, that's fine. That would also be an octave, by the way. Technically speaking, this is 2 octaves, but we're still thinking of it as an octave. What's the other way to begin? It has to be a perfect interval. And you're saying perfect 5th. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, wait a second. He said that you can't use a perfect 5th. This is the counterpoint above the cantus firmus. There's no problem. There's no confusion. So by all means, you could use a 5th. You could use this octave. You could use this octave. You have 3 ways of starting. Which way is the right way? They're all right. The question is, which one will help you get a smooth flowing, beautiful line the best? And that's something that you might have to use by trial and error. Now, the first thing, before you just start composing, let's say you did decide on that octave up here. It's not a bad idea to start and end on the same note. Let's say you did decide on that. Okay, now you need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 other measures. You need an answer in each one of these measures. How are you going to go about figuring out what you could do? Well, first you need to, this is a nice little grid that they made. This is a way of visualizing your options, okay? Now remember what your options are. They're all consonances. So if you're given an A, well, what could you have? You could have a third above that. What's a third above A? And you're saying, oh, right, C. What about, can we have a 4th above? No, that's dissonance. What about a 5th? Yeah, we could have a 5th above A. That would be E. What about a 6th? Oh yeah, that's imperfect. So that's F. We have a 7th? No, that's dissonant. So notice there are no dissonances here in our options. And of course we could just repeat, we could have the same note that's unison or octave. Yeah, okay. So you'll notice here in this octave line that they did this for you already. where they basically just wrote the same note, right? G to G, F to F, E to E, D to D. Now, how does this help you? Well, this is showing you what your options are. So let's do one more of these, and you can pause the video and do this yourself if you want the challenge now. So if you're given a G, of course, the octave or the unison would be G. We're not going to have a unison in this case because that would be below the staff, right? And that would be down here. That's not going to work. Okay. So we're talking about the octave. What about the third? What's the third above G? What's a fifth above G? Okay, go ahead and fill those in. Okay, and you came up with the answer of, I'm sure you did. This is a B flat. Notice your key signature. And fifth above G would be D. Okay, now let's say I fill in all of these, and this is going to be part of your homework, is filling in what are all of your options. Third, fifth, sixth, octave, okay? So that's the first thing you should do. Then you're coming up with, then you're composing. You're going to be composing a counterpoint. Now, as long as we're obeying the rules or thinking of the guidelines that we've laid out, like avoid parallel fifths, avoid parallel octaves, avoid direct fifths, avoid direct octaves, then I think we should be okay. So what are some options here? So we have an A. If I went to a C here, this is nice because it's stepwise motion, right down. I like it. That could work. An E. Okay, this is in similar motion, but this is stepwise. Okay, so we're not leaping. It's let's see. Yeah, it's not as good as going down here in contrary motion. That doesn't present any problems. What about the F? So that would be the sixth. That could also work. Okay, so I think our best options would be either the third, which would be moving in contrary motion, or the sixth. Okay, now there's no wrong answer here, but once you make a decision, it kind of leads you to the next one, don't you think? It's sort of like life. Yesterday you decided to do X, Y, and Z. Well, it has some effect on what you do today. Last year, you decided to go back to school or take this job. Well, it has an effect on this year. Same goes for these exercises. So once you make a decision, it will affect the next measure. Sometimes you paint yourself into a corner and you say, I don't have any options. Then you need to go back maybe a step or two to see where it went wrong. What could you do instead? So let's say you choose the sixth. Where else could you go next? Well, I suppose you could just walk down, right? Could you just go down? That would make sixth to a sixth. Oh, well, yeah, that would work. We could have parallel sixth. That would be fine. Do you see how I'm doing this? I'm seeing what's possible and does it present any problems? Okay, let's say if we chose to use this to go in contrary motion instead. So let's say we went to the third. Okay, and again, could we go to B flat, just continue that down? Yeah, we could have parallel thirds. That would work well. Okay, what about fifth? Oh, this is nice as well. Contrary motion, I don't see any problems with that. Contrary motion is our friend. A sixth. Let's see if that would work. I think it's less smooth. Don't you hear it? I think it's a little less smooth. So again, I'm going to be checking each one of these. So octave, third, third. Okay, that works. Downward motion. Yeah, I like that. What about our first thought was going parallel sixth? That also works. Okay. What about going to the fifth here? Octave, third, fifth. That also works. Contrary motion. So again, it has to do with, okay, where do I want to go next? Personally, I think I would go with either parallel sixth, or parallel thirds, because those treat us really well. Right? Okay. I think this gives you enough to go on. I think I don't want to give you too much more information besides that. I want you to fill in the grid. Now it looks a little bit different on the sheet I gave you. Let's go over to that. Let's look at your homework. So this is due this coming Monday. And again, this grid looks a little bit different. I gave you that sixth to start with. And here I'm asking you to fill in the leading tone. So all you have to do is copy it over. So I think this number one should be fairly simple for you because some of it's been done for you already. But what if we look at number two? Now this could be a little bit more confusing because look at this. It's the same. Oh, by the way, can't believe it. I left off the key signature. So go ahead and fill this in. Okay, this is with the flat. Apologies for that. Okay. So notice that here we have the counterpoint below the cantus firmus. All right. It's the same cantus firmus that we saw already. We're going to be composing a counterpoint below it. Now this is a little bit more difficult, isn't it? It's a different way of thinking. A lot of people have trouble thinking of intervals in reverse. But remember, they're the same number whether you count them going ascending or descending, as long as you count the number one for where you start. Now here I gave you the place to start. This is third, fifth, sixth octave. Remember, we don't have the fifth as an option. Right? We can't start with a sixth. We know that's against the rule. We can't start with a third. I suppose we could have started with a unison. That would be another option, D. But here I gave you the starting pitch. But for sure, this was also an option. We could have started here. Okay, so good to know for future because we will be composing more and more species counterpoint exercises. We need to get in the habit of, okay, which intervals can we start with above or below the cantus firmus? The next thing we're doing is looking at the cadence, right? So here we have re, do. Remember your key, you're in the key of D minor. Here we want T, do. Now I don't want to fill this in for you. I think you should be able to figure this out. 7 to 1. So think of your harmonic minor, D harmonic minor. You're going to fill in the answer here. Okay, the 7th scale degree. Okay, now you have all these other options. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, you have 6 notes that you need to figure out. What could you do? Well, you're going to go through the same process. You're going to say, okay, what's the third below A? You come up with F. Okay, what's a fifth below A? You come up with D. What's a sixth below A? And you come up with C. And what's an octave below A? And of course you say A. Okay, so now that's the first thing you're going to do is fill in all of these options here. All right, do that first, because then you're going to go through and say, okay, what are my options? How could I compose a smooth, flowing, beautiful line? For example, let's go from D, and then we're going to double check what works. So this is D, that's an octave. And let's try going from D to F. Okay, that's going to a third. Well, we're going to check it here. That works. Yeah, I like it. What about, Let's try going to a D. Okay. Technically, okay, that's not violating the rule of dissonance, so we have all consonants, but do we really want the same note? No, in general, we're going to try to write a different note. So we don't want to repeat notes unless we absolutely have to. We only use that as a last resort if we just cannot find another solution. But there is another solution. Already we know we could have put the F. Okay, what about the sixth? So C. Let's check that. Let's see how it sounds. That could work. The descending motion, I like that. We have contrary motion. That could work. Notice I didn't say C sharp. Okay, we're really only going to use the raised 7th scale degree at the cadence. Now this does sound typical to, let's say, a Baroque piece of music or classical or romantic, but remember this is a modal art form that we're dealing with principally. So we're not going to think in terms of, oh, this is from a 1-5-1 progression, which I'm sure you've seen and heard already in your previous theory class. So in general, we're going to avoid that raised 7th, the leading tone, until we see the cadence. Okay, so C is another option. So we could have a 6th. What about A? Oh, well, this is a good question. Okay, A, or I suppose you could have gone up, either one. So A here, A here. So let's mark the interval. Okay, look at this, octave to an octave. This is right, parallel octaves. Now, to our modern ears, this sounds fine, but in this style and in the context of writing these exercises, this is a big no-no. We don't want to use this. Okay, solution. Let's bring this down an octave, and then it's no longer parallel, right? Then it's contrary. Well, this is also a problem. If you play it, you can hear that has the sense of accenting the second note, and we want a smooth flowing, beautiful line from beginning to end. So this doesn't work. Okay. So we found one, so actually 2 out of 4 options did not work. So we can't have the A because that would create parallel octaves, and we can't have the D because that would create oblique motion, which we don't want. So we have either the F or the C. Okay, so I think you see how this works. It's fairly limited. In fact, species 1 is the most limiting species because you have very few options, and if you make one little wrong move, it can affect a lot of things after. And it's sort of like doing a puzzle that you get to hear and sing, which is the best kind of puzzle. Okay, so I think this has given us a good primer for species 1. I want you to try your best. You probably will make a mistake or two, but if you go through the steps, you'll have a good sense of how to start doing this, how to start thinking of composing in a contrapuntal way. Okay, so this is very exciting. Congratulations for getting this far. We're wrapping up this chapter. We'll talk about a couple other details from chapter 9, but mainly we're moving to chapter 10 starting next week. So job well done, and I'll look forward to seeing your homework soon. Okay, so reach out with questions anytime, and I'll see you shortly. Take care.